You can look at other things that impact somebody's ability to earn a livelihood. And if you put yourself in that person's shoes, you can understand why they're angry and why they want to protest or why they have a different view or a different opinion, whether it's their employer or government.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Beneath the Law. I'm Gavin Tighe here with Stephen Thiele. Stephen, how are you tonight?
I'm okay, Gavin. We're still in frigid Toronto. You look like you're in a warm place, and are you ready to play some music?
Well, you're seeing my secret stash back there, Mike.
Is that a secret stash?
I'm a bit of a guitar collector, so
okay.
That's a few of the items in the museum of natural guitar history.
But you're a pretty good musician. I'm not musically inclined, Gavin, but you've got some good skills that way.
I used to be a good musician until I wrecked my hand, and now I can't play guitar anymore.
Are you going to sue somebody for that?
Unfortunately, I have nobody to sue but myself, and I'll never collect. So yeah, the word my joke was that's a stupid thing, but my joke to everyone has been is the worst kind of injury because I fell in my own house, which is the worst. So my legal advice to all of our listeners is if you're going to fall, make sure it's in somebody else's house who has lots of insurance. But no, I didn't follow my own good legal advice, which is why the old saying is, when you represent yourself, you have a fool for a client. So there you go. I guess.
Well, Gavin, we need you here at the firm, so please don't slip and fall anywhere else and create any other injuries because that's not good. Sacrifice somebody else next time.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, I have no one to blame but myself, unfortunately.
Well.
And it was. I'd love to say that it was some great like parachuting accident, but it was. I wouldn't even get into how stupid it was. Anyways, today we're going to talk.
Were there some protesters in front of your house?
No, yeah, I was rushing to get to a protest. So we live in a very tumultuous time. There is no doubt that it is. It's remarkable at the moment how divided the world has become, and not just Canada. Certainly, I'd say Canada probably less so than many places, but certainly we're seeing out of the United States the incredible protests that are occurring about ICE and the shootings in Minnesota, in Iran, we're seeing another uprising. It's almost like a Arab Spring 2.0 that again is being quelled with mercilessly by a tyrannical regime. So we see the power of government in both aspects of those issues being turned on the citizens of a given country who are protesting the government. In other words, the citizenry in both of those instances are speaking out, exercising what many feel would be certainly in the United States, their constitutional right to protest, and being met with, certainly in both of those instances, deadly force by government in response to protests. I mean, you can look at that, the shootings in Minnesota, both of which are on video, which is incredible. I guess that's the day and age we live in where everything's on video. But, depending on which side of the spectrum you're on, it's amazing to me that two people can watch the same video and come away with two totally different takes on it. Although the second video was a little difficult to understand why someone lying on the ground would be shot. But anyways, it's easy. So at the same time, I'm not certainly an apologist, but I think law enforcement are often under incredible pressure and strain. Having said all of that, we in Canada are certainly not immune to issues where government has taken what I will call extreme steps to quell civil disobedience, unrest, and some would say constitutionally protected right to protest. And in Canada, we recently had a decision out of our federal court dealing with what was colloquially referred to as the trucker convoy or the Freedom Convoy, depending on which side of the spectrum you are. It's amazing, again, the nomenclature that describes an event, gives away your view of that event. So depending on which side of you're on it, there were a bunch of truckers honking their horns in Ottawa. Let's put it that way.
Well, I
And
think it was just more than truckers, but
well, there were a bunch of
but they were the primary lead.
sure. Was started with truckers and probably expanded to everyone who had a bone to pick with the government. And our government here invoked what used to be called the War Measures Act, the Emergencies Act. And that issue has now gone up through the court. So maybe you can give our listeners a bit of the judicial background of how that came about.
Yeah, so this was a protest that ended up occupying, the parliamentary district in Ottawa, our nation's capital here in Canada, for I guess it was 3 to 4 weeks. That arose out of the COVID-19 requirements to be vaccinated. And essential service workers, which included truck drivers, didn't need to be vaccinated until approximately, I guess it was January 15th of 2022 or thereabouts, which sparked the truckers who now needed to be get their COVID-19 vaccines, which many of them did not get, to start
didn't want to get.
and didn't want to get, to start a protest, which started in Western Canada and saw its wind its way across the highways to Ottawa. And as it continued to proceed to Ottawa, Western Canada is about a 2.5-day drive, 3-day drive across Canada on the highway. Picked up steam and picked up others. And, at the time there were blockades. We remember this one well at the Windsor Bridge because the government there, the municipal government, actually got a court order and an injunction against the people that were blockading the bridge. And a court made an order and police went in and cleared it up pretty fast.
Yeah.
There were some other blockades in some other provinces in Alberta. Some of the protesters had weapons. The RCMP went in around the same time and cleared out that protest. They made some arrests. But Prime Minister Trudeau, or then Prime Minister Trudeau, he's no longer our Prime Minister, and I won't editorialize there. But he
No,
he
we'll
decided.
talk about that later. It's funny. I was like, the career path of Justin Trudeau. He's graduated now to be Katy Perry's boyfriend. But anyway,
Well, I'm not. Well, who knows?
far
what's
more
going on
important
there.
job. Anyways, sorry, couldn't help it.
So anyway, he invoked what is called the Emergencies Act, and the federal government decided to impose certain regulatory orders to quash the protest. And those regulatory orders included banning people from assembling and protesting, whether they were peaceful or violent, and basically prohibited others from supporting the protesters, either through giving food or water or funding. And that was quite a controversial order, given that the blockades had been cleared in other places. And it wound its way through a public inquiry, and it's wound its way through to the Federal Court of Canada, which in January 26th released a decision saying that the government improperly used the Emergencies Act to make these orders.
Yeah, so let's go back just in terms of the architecture of those decisions. So the original public inquiry that was held into the use of what is now called the Emergencies Act said that it was appropriate. It was properly used. Basically no issue. And that finding is what was judicially reviewed by the federal court, and then that the federal court said no, that finding was wrong. It was not properly utilized. There was no legitimate basis for the invocation of the Emergencies Act, which is designed basically, it used to be called the War Measures Act. And I think with good reason, because it was primarily there to give government extraordinary, incredible power to deal with wartime type issues. In other words, where the security of Canada as a nation was in jeopardy, and we didn't have time, frankly, or the government didn't have time for the niceties of usual civil liberties of protest, etc., and had to clamp down real hard on citizens' rights. And the federal court and the federal court of appeal, in my reading of it, said no. The security of Canada was not an issue by a bunch of yahoos, frankly, honking their horns in Ottawa. It was obnoxious, and they looked at the way that other governments, the provincial government, both here and in Alberta, had managed to, I think, quite swiftly and efficiently dismantle similar protests that were congealing at entry points along the border, and said that was your model. And this notion of letting this get to the point it did, where they had, they were locking up people's bank accounts. There was all the videos of the horses charging, etc. Really, they let the situation get out of hand, and then they invoked this extraordinary legislation to clean up their own mess.
Yeah, so just falling back a little bit further, Gavin. So the War Measures Act was very vague in terms of when government could invoke it, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's father, when Pierre Elliott Trudeau, when he was Prime Minister, used the War Measures Act during the 1970 October crisis in Quebec to quash what were basically terrorist activities in Quebec only. And it was very controversial that he invoked the War Measures Act. So then you had legislative change, which built in to the Emergencies Act basically a reasonableness requirement in order to use it. And that really became the crux of what the court was looking at. Whether it was reasonable, whether there were reasonable grounds to invoke this statute, and was there a threat to national security or not? It looked like what government was doing was they were putting this orders and regulations into place because they were concerned about the supply chain more than anything else. The protesters didn't have guns or bombs or rifles. There was no insurrection, certainly at Parliament Hill. And frankly, other than the Coutts, Alberta incident where there were weapons, the protesters were not violent. They were peaceful protesters. They had parked their trucks in the middle of the street and were creating havoc in downtown Ottawa, but nobody was really, other than a handful of incidents that happened because of certain folks who were out of control. They were largely peaceful protests. And, what was the government concerned about? That their policies were being threatened or questioned?
I think
So
former Prime Minister Trudeau liked a lot of the flags, which had certain expletive associated with his name. So I think he was quite offended by that.
Well, look, government had to make some very difficult decisions at the time, but the protesters, people in a free democracy, can certainly chant and protest. Now, interestingly enough, what I think is important here for us as Canadians is that there was actually a process that was followed. In terms of government didn't send out the military against people. They, the police weren't really there which was a problem in Ottawa because the police didn't know how to respond. But there wasn't a threatening us versus them mentality between police and the protesters, unlike what we've seen in certainly Iran, where thousands of people, I understand, were killed by the government. Uh, Thousands more were arrested, and I think they were threatened with execution. Minnesota and what has happened in Minneapolis is to me, different and distinguishable from that. But you do have police and protesters certainly creating some very tense moments, which unfortunately has led to the death of two of those protesters there. But remarkably, in Canada, there was a process that was followed, and we're seeing that has followed through the court system.
Yeah, there was review after the fact. I mean, what the Federal
Exact,
Court of
yeah,
Appeal, I think it is important, is that they imposed an exacting standard that be applied to the declaration of a public order emergency. It's not just any of, I don't like what these guys are saying, that gives government the right to do that. And, while blockades are disruptive and disturbing, the convoy protest was not found to be a threat to national security. I think we step back. Of course, it wasn't a threat to national security. I mean, this isn't an invading force. It isn't a group that is, a militia that is were armed and seeking through force to take over control of government property or a territory or what have you.
it
It
certainly
literally,
wasn't Olympus Has Fallen, right?
yeah. So I think I think that that threshold is necessary. But what's troubling to me is, okay, they did it. They create, it achieved its objective. The
Yes.
protest ended pretty quickly once they invoked the act, because they gave themselves all sorts of powers. They literally gave themselves the power to arrest and detain and freeze bank accounts and sue people who, freeze bank accounts of people who were donating. They came up with lists. Anyone who donated to the truckers were on the list. It was a pretty intense witch hunt that went on. And it did, if the purpose of it was to shut down the protest, it achieved its purpose.
It
So
certainly did that, but I think
unlawfully, as the Federal Court of Appeal has now suggested. But so what? It's done. So what?
that's true, but it was certainly a remarkable orders, because I think the biggest thing that shut down the protest was the shutdown in the funding,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And the fear that other Canadians had, if I donate to it's like donating to a political party, the bank is going to shut down my account. I mean,
That's terrifying.
look, the banks are pretty powerful. If they think that you're part of organized crime, for example, they
They
don't need
debank
to,
you.
they will debank you. They don't need
Yeah.
to deal with you as a customer. Then
Yeah.
where do you go?
It's terrifying. I mean, I've had that happen, or I've heard of that happening in a number of cases that we've been involved in, where there's been accusations of fraud, and that's all it takes. And the bank says, you know what, too hot for us. Go take your business somewhere else. And in Canada, there's a very limited choice of where you can take your business. And at a certain point, you're going to run out of options.
Right.
And so that ability to debank someone, and I just sort of digress. I understand that Trump has got a lawsuit going on against a financial institution with respect to they debanked him as well. So it's a pretty powerful weapon in the arsenal of a bank. I don't know how much recourse there is. I mean, you can't force a bank to do business with you if they don't want to, can you?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard
So
of that.
they
Like,
can deal with
right.
who they want to deal with. If they don't like you, unless it's obviously, if it was some protected ground under a human rights issue, or like, race or sexual orientation, sure, then you'd have a remedy. But if they just decide for whatever reason that they think you're,
A bad
a
guy.
sketchy character,
Right.
they can decide for whatever reason they want to say, you know what, take your business elsewhere. They're a private company. What right do you have to say, no, I have a right to bank here? Says who?
I agree, and I guess, Gavin, you're right in terms of there's a little bit of mootness involved in the lawsuits, because the protest ended.
Yeah, I mean, the lawsuits,
Remarkably quickly, right?
the judicial reviews that have occurred. I mean, I think it's sort of it reminded me of a bit of an autopsy. Doesn't help the corpse very much. It's still dead. So I mean, yeah, now we know that the government's use of it was improper, and I mean, I think any reasonable observer, unless you were a complete, you know, completely enthralled with the government's point of view, would think it's a bit much. It was a bit of overreach and overkill on the part of government to invoke, the Emergencies Act in respect of a bunch of protesters in Ottawa, as where other protesters have been dealt with, so um, nicely. We've seen protests, encampments, and universities, etc., for that have been dealt with kid gloves, and here we've got the Emergencies Act. So I think most people, the truth be told, knew intuitively that this was overreach by government, and the federal court has said exactly that.
Well, look, it's very interesting. What I take away from this case, or the entire uh, uh, use of the Emergencies Act, and what the courts have reviewed, is that there are options. So, what happened in Windsor? There was an injunction, right? They were blocking the street. You can't park your car on the street and have a blockade. It's against the law.
Yeah, well, try it during rush hour. See how fast the tow truck will be pulling up in front of you.
Exactly, and so for the federal government to have invoked the Emergencies Act to clear the streets, there were options. And in fact, in Ottawa, there was actually an injunction that was granted to residents to prevent the honking of the horns at all hours of the night, because that was considered to be a nuisance. And so,
yeah, I guess that would be a definite nuisance. If you're an auto, you would be praying for deafness.
well, exactly. So, and the Ottawa police could have used the Ontario Provincial Police, the RCMP could have been called upon, but instead the government used this legislative weapon as
went
a
to the
hammer.
nuclear option, right? This is the most extreme recourse that government has, and the question becomes: shouldn't the most extreme recourse only be for the most extreme of problems?
Right, and so we've talked about Prime Minister Trudeau. I think this was basically the death knell of him as Prime Minister, because how dare he and his government invoke a piece of legislation that deliberately impacted the rights of lawful protesters. Like, protesting and political speech is our most fundamental right as Canadians, and that's
and I think we need to think about that for a minute, because ultimately the right to protest and voice dissent is exactly that. It is the people who do not agree with government policy are the ones who dissent. They are the ones who protest. So governments are never going to, get what they want to hear out of a protest, because ultimately protests are always going to be against government by definition.
right, and you're never going to get 100% support on any policy.
Right.
It just won't happen.
No, and I mean, I think the mandatory vaccination mandates that were in place for truckers, for example, that basically deprived them of their ability to make a livelihood.
Right.
That really rose to that issue. Can government compel you to get a vaccination? I mean, we just went through that situation. Ultimately, that's what they were protesting, isn't it? Amongst other things. But fundamentally, that was the primary issue, was that cross-border truckers couldn't make a living unless they were vaccinated. They couldn't get back into Canada.
100%. I mean, you can look at other things that impact somebody's ability to earn a livelihood. And if you put yourself in that person's shoes, you can understand why they're angry and why they want to protest or why they have a different view or a different opinion, whether it's their employer or government.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, the history, I mean, it will be interesting to see how history views the vaccine mandates imposed by many, many governments around the world, and how it looks at those laws and the way they were enforced, in 50 years from now, for example, when sort of everybody's passion on this has cooled a bit.
well, unless there's another strain of some virus that causes government to try and do the same thing. It certainly has
Well,
changed our world.
I think it's changed our world significantly, but I also think, and I don't know, I haven't looked at the statistics to back this up, but you see things, for example, like measles coming back as a problem.
Right.
Why? I think that the COVID vaccines, generally speaking, wore out a lot of people's confidence in vaccinations generally, and so people now approach a lot of vaccinations. Maybe it's because of social media, disinformation, whatever the reason, but people are far more skeptical about vaccinations generally now than they were pre-COVID.
Well, particularly this vaccination, because again, the information that people were being given is that this was a experimental form of vaccine. If you recall, this was, I think it's called an mRNA process, right? Which is not your traditional vaccination where you take the actual virus to create the vaccine. And so it was a lot different, and people were hesitant, because it's linking and changing or attaching to your DNA. And
Well,
how
there's a
long is
lot of
that
things
going to
people were
last?
told. I
Well,
mean,
exactly,
but
right?
proved to be. I mean, in fairness, I mean, I'm certainly not a vaccine denier, but there were a lot of things that people were told point blank that just were not true. I mean, it was the government in the United States, for example. I can recall Joe Biden saying, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The truth of the matter was that you could get COVID after the vaccination. I had 3 of them and I got it. So its efficacy is certainly was not what it was sold as, and anyone who says it is, I think, has been proven wrong. Plus, I think they're now admitting that, oh yeah, there were side effects, and for example, there were
Right.
heart issues with younger males. A disproportionate number of them had cardiac issues. So look, there was lots of misinformation spun around on all sides of this issue. But the point being is that the government's reaction to it on all sides of the issue, the invocation of the most draconian legislation that Canada has to shut down a protest, is very, very troubling. Just as troubling, frankly, as the use of deadly force in Minnesota to quell the voices of people who don't like the use of the ICE task force and they're a paramilitary organization in Minnesota to enforce immigration law.
Well,
So,
I don't know if they're a
well,
paramilitary
they sure look like
organization,
one.
but
They dress like
look,
they
look,
dress like
it's,
urban assault soldiers. They don't
well,
dress like
I think
bobbies on the street
oh,
corner.
but it's unfortunate and tragic what happened, and I don't know if it was the commander there of the ICE agents had a different view in terms of how to handle a protest. We've seen this certainly in Toronto policing. Lack of training in certain areas does lead to police officers shooting people who should not be shot.
Yeah, look, I mean,
So it happens,
and it's easy. It's easy, real easy for everyone to sit in the comfort
of
of their living
course,
room watching a slow motion video saying "CCC." I think put yourself in that situation happening in real time when you're scared, and police officers want to go home at night, just like same as everybody else, and you're scared, and you think that your life is in
100%.
danger, and there's an imprecision, and it's easy in hindsight to look at. I mean, it's easy to watch the replay, yeah, but try being in the game. It's very different.
No, so, look, it's a very interesting situation. I think we might be doing a podcast on a different issue in terms of what's happened in Minneapolis involving some
Yeah.
journalism soon. But
Yeah.
look,
We should do that.
for our listeners, the Federal Court of Appeal case is very dense. It's a 167-page decision. But I commend certainly folks like law students or people who are interested in constitutional law to pay a careful read with respect to the Section 2 and Section 8 analysis. Section 8 dealing with search and seizure, and really getting a some good content out of there as to how strong the protections are for the rights under Section 2, particularly political speech, and Section 8 rights to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure.
Yeah, which were trampled on, frankly, with the use of the Emergencies Act. I
Yes.
think was the finding. A fascinating discussion as always, and interesting to me of what comes of it, whether or not we will see civil litigation arising out of that it relies on these findings or not. It remains to be seen whether that will be the case. But at the moment, I mean, I don't know that the government has suffered a lot of consequences. Justin Trudeau has moved on, as I said, to bigger and better things.
And a
But
number of his ministers have moved on.
yeah, but the government remains. I mean, we have the majority of members of parliament who are under the Trudeau government remain members of parliament, and they remain in government.
Well,
So
we're a liberal country, Gavin. What
indeed
can
we are.
say?
Indeed we are, both small and large. In any event, Stephen, I guess it goes to show that even the government, if no one is above the law, then everyone is beneath it. Thanks again. Please send us your comments, criticisms, ideas for new show ideas. Stephen, take care and stay warm.
Thanks. You too.